You're listening to Speakonomics. I'm Devan Hadrian.
And I'm Tantra Tanjaya.
This podcast is brought to you by Canopy FEB UI. In the second episode of Speakonomics, we will be discussing the recent merger of Gojek and Tokopedia, and also the role of the ever-growing startups in the Southeast Asian economy.
This episode also marks the first instance of Speakonomics being hosted fully in English.
The merger of Gojek and Tokopedia into the GoTo group marks a new era for startups in Southeast Asia and Indonesia, which is home to an increasingly growing startup culture. Nowadays, tech-savvy digital startups seem to face a promising future in the ecosystem of the Southeast Asian economy. In a region with nearly 700 million people in population, most of these startups have transformed into super apps that have been downloaded more than 100 million times, each aiming to be used to provide all sorts of purchases and services. However, in recent days, the startup business model itself has been criticized many times for its alleged unsustainability and inability to gain profit. New and emerging startups are also more susceptible to the increasing competitiveness of the scheme, as well as vulnerabilities and uncertainties, such as the COVID-19 pandemic that has caused many companies to go out of business. But beyond this merger, one might ask, what's next for Southeast Asia startups?
In today's discussions, we are accompanied by Ms. Fransiska Herline. She is an economist at Grab, one of Southeast Asia's largest digital startups. Ms. Herline, welcome to Speakonomics. How are you today?
Hey, thank you. I'm feeling great. I'm so excited to share my view and discuss about startup today.
Yeah, I think we are also as equally excited as you are. So let's just jump straight into the discussion.
All right.
So over the last few years, the term startup has been thrown around quite a lot as some sort of buzzword, especially by the urban youth in Southeast Asia. Today, it's in almost every aspect of our lives, and so many people dream of owning or working in one. But what actually is a startup, and what differentiates it from traditional companies?
Yeah, so technically speaking, startup is just a term for a new entrepreneurial venture. So when you start a business, be it in a tech business or in other industry, it's also considered a startup. But there's two distinction between these startups that emerges in Indonesia. So there are startups who just want to start a slow business, and the other one is startup who really want to transform how the world looks like. And most of the startups here are those startups in tech industry. So I think when we talk about startups, mainly people refer to those tech companies in Indonesia mostly.
Yeah, I also agree. The word startup is really closely associated with tech, and when we see a startup, it's almost linked in some way to some kind of new technological product. But so what do you think makes like startup really reliant on using these technologies as a core function of their business or as a main medium for their promotion and other activities?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting thing about startup is recently those startups who emerges in Indonesia are these startups who are trying to transform how people behave. So we want to transform people's lifestyle, and the way we transform this lifestyle is through digitizing how people do the everyday activities in their life and connect people with one another. So I think that's one of the biggest idea that we are trying to bring here when we do startup.
Oh, so it's about transforming people's lives. Yeah, I also kind of agree because as I have said earlier, that many startups are like so close and so interlinked with all of our everyday activities, right?
Exactly.
For example, like before Gojek existed, we never thought of such an easy and accessible medium of transportation. Like, and others started following suit really soon, and I think it really changes the paradigm of how we live. But I'm also interested in one of your earlier statements about the slower startups, the ones that don't necessarily want to change the world, or the ones that don't necessarily affiliate themselves with technology that much. what do you think of those startups, and why are they still be able to be classified as startups when in fact they are radically different from what we all commonly know as startups?
Yeah. So back to the definition of startup itself. So when you're starting a business and you are trying to basically you need fund to like grow that business and lift it up from the ground, you're building a startup, right? But sometimes when people build a business, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to change the world. Maybe some people just want to like, I don't know, start a cafe, something like that. So even that is also a startup. And given the market in Indonesia and given the like many varieties of products, many needs that many products that we consume in our lives, I think there's also a chance for these types of business to also grow. I think you are all familiar with the concept of monopolistic competition, so I guess that's why.
All right, so I think in many ways, we have seen the tremendous impacts of startups, especially in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, because when we talk about startups 10 years ago, we have seen so many startups that is very successful in recent years, but 10 years ago, they don't exactly exist. Well, among those are Gojek, Tokopedia, Grab, and the Sea Limited in Singapore. So the real question is that when people talks about startups, they usually talks about the way startup change the environment of the economy in the country. But they rarely talk about how these startups interact with each other, interlink, and how their industry is different than other industries that we know existed before the startups came to this region. Among those are the questions about the merger of Gojek and Tokopedia, which recently merged into one super apps, one of the biggest startups in the world, one might say, the GoTo group. So, from your current standpoints, how do you describe the market ecosystem for startup, and how does it differ from other industries?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think in the past we have been so busy competing with one another. I think everyone knows that, and everyone can see that clearly. But interesting point about collaboration. So I think this is also where these startups are heading in the future. We want to build more collaboration, not only between startups, but if possible, we also work with those who are outside the ecosystem. Because again, the goal of startup itself is to, tech startups, I mean, in this case, is to transform the way people live, the lifestyle, their behavior. We want to transform that. So in order to do that, we need more collaboration. And I think what really differentiates between the market ecosystem, between startups and the traditional companies, you might say, is that we're not only selling products. That's one thing. So we're not only selling products, so we're selling services most of the time. Like, for example, if you talk about e-commerce, what we sell is basically the platform itself. Platform itself is a product, but when you connect those merchants with consumers, or in the case of Grab and Gojek, we are connecting merchants, consumers, and also driver partners and restaurants. We are not just providing the product as a platform. We also provide services, right, in a sense. And we also build an ecosystem. And this is something new. When you compare with more traditional companies, what they do is, I'm not judging, but what they do is basically, mostly we are just selling products. And when you compare with traditional companies, the business model itself is more stable. It's already proven for decades, for example. While for startups, other than the product is new, because technology has just like boom in the last decade, and then in the 2 decades ago, we don't have these pretty technologies, right? And yeah, so the business model itself is also new. So it's another challenge that we're facing right now, other than innovating new products, new services. We also have to ensure that our business model is solid so that we can also stay and be with the consumers and help the economy grow.
Well, that's an interesting answer because it describes how it differs with other industries. But if you are given one word or one sentences to describe how this market ecosystem differ from other industries, the traditional industries, what would be the word or the sentence to describe it?
I would say it's a lifestyle transformation.
Oh yeah, that's a very interesting one. Well, we also know that our lifestyle has radically altered. First, when the startup came, and then second, after the COVID-19 came to our lives. So, one of the interesting part that you said before is about the stability of the business model. So, one of the exact words that you use is that the traditional companies are much more stable on their model. So, does it indicate that startups relatively is more volatile and their market ecosystem is much more fluctuative?
Interesting one. So, in a sense, well, I guess there are many phases of startups. Some of the startups actually provide a very basic services. The way you define basic is like it is very close to your everyday needs. But some other startups are also those who are trying to build a new or introduce a new services, or they really want to transform something, whatever it might be, and maybe it's not very close to your everyday needs. And another one is those startups who really focuses on technology. So when we talk about these startups who really like focus on building the technology, I'm not saying that startups like Gojek and Grabs and Tokopedia and others are not focusing on technology, but there are also other startups who actually help us to maintain our advantage. So in a sense, if you talk about those startups who are providing products which are very close to your daily needs, for example, like Grab and Gojek and maybe Tokopedia and also Sia or Shopee, the competition itself is very high. So it's not in terms of the size is volatile. The size is there, the demand is there, but the competition is very tight, especially in Indonesia, because I think everyone here is already aware that Indonesia is seen as a big market. We have a big potential the economy itself is very big. And when you enter Jakarta only, there's a big potential, a big ocean of consumers that you might touch, you might want to penetrate. But because of that, many companies are trying to get in Indonesia and compete in this market ecosystem. So that's why that's why it's hard and it's challenging for startup to turn profitable as soon as possible.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I do agree that Indonesia, especially with our fourth largest population in the world, is a really big market for these technological startups. And I think you've raised an interesting point here that most of the volatility of the startup market actually comes from the competition. instead of the business model or the inaccessible demand itself, but rather it comes just from the sheer amount of startups there are. And I think it's kind of counterintuitive if you think about this in the context of the GoTo merger, because some people have stated that the business model of startups, it's like mutually destructive, because you're like spending a lot of your operating spendings on marketing, on getting market share. But on the other hand, it also proves that actually startups can collaborate in this situation, in this kind of environment. So what do you think about this? Do you think the environment right now is more collaborative, or it's still as really competitive as usual?
So competition is there. The chance for collaboration is also there, for sure. And I think when people say that why do startup just focuses on building its market, like acquiring as many customers as possible, and not focusing on going or paving their path into profitability as soon as like they have gone in the business for a few years. The key here is about the network effect. So the strength of the startup itself, or tech startups, especially those who are B2C startups, is how we connect a bunch of customers with our partners, or with partners, be it like drivers, merchants, everything, or sellers in this case. So when you don't have that network, it will also be kind of impossible for you to build the profit. Because at some point, if you compare, like, for example, the cost of building the product itself, the technology needed to build all the innovation in the product, and then compare it with maybe the margin that we get from the transaction itself, you need a really big size of the market until you can actually become profitable. And I think that is where the startups right now are heading after they have been growing in the past decades so far. So yeah, so that's one on the startup itself. And I think the network effect is very important. For example, if you're a seller, if there's no consumers in the platform, why would you stay in Tokopedia, for example? And if you are customers, like, why would you use Grab services if you cannot find a driver when you want to go somewhere? So network effect is very important, and that is why we spend a lot of money into building the network. So that's one. And regarding the competition and the collaboration, I think at the heart of every startup, we are trying to be relevant to the customers. So to be relevant, one of the key ideas that we've been saying in the past few years is being a super app, because then you can provide many products and many services. And just imagine, like, one consumer, you go to one app and you can do everything. That's the ideal situation that every startup is hoping to achieve, right? But in the past, what we've done is competing with one another, whereas given the condition and the current COVID situation, we have more limited resources in terms of cash and capital, and that is why maybe we don't need to compete as much. We can do collaboration. We can work with one another, and yeah, like what GoTo did, for example, to make a super app easier and faster.
So the collaboration is also partially driven by the current situation, right? But speaking about, we have talked a lot about the business model and the profitability and market share of these startups. But so the business model of these startups has often been criticized as being unsustainable, with their strategies of blitz scaling and focusing on market valuation rather than profit, as we have discussed earlier. And in fact, maybe I think you also know this, but most of the startups that we are familiar with today have already attempted to make an IPO on stock markets without even having clocked in a single dollar in profits, with examples like Bukalapak, which has recently made an IPO on the Indonesia Stock Exchange, or SEA Limited on the New York Stock Exchange, or other startups through the Special Purpose Acquisition Company, or SPAC. With that in mind, what do you think about the future of these startups in Southeast Asia, and how will they continue to persist?
Yeah. So it is interesting because many of the startups, including those big startups which started in the US, they actually go to IPO even before they're profitable. For example, Uber. And Uber gave us a very good lesson, but it's not good for them. It wasn't good for Uber because the stock price dropped. But for us or for other startups, I think this really give us a big lesson, because other than market growth, other than scaling up the size of the company itself, we also need to see a clear path. Although we have not achieved that goal, but we need to build the path to profitability. And I think every startup now, at least the big startups like Bukalapak and other startups who are aiming to go public sooner in the coming years, are already aware of this. And this has been the big, not only the big talks, but in the heart of the company itself, we also do that. We also have some targets like how can we achieve this? How can we turn more profitable, reduce our costs, and operate more efficiently, right? Because for those startups who are aiming to transform the way people live, my CEO always says this, we need to hit double bottom line. What do we mean by double bottom line? It's simply, one, we have to operate as effective as possible, as efficient as possible. And secondly, we need to make impact, because we are partnering and we are helping so many people in this country, not only in this country, but maybe in this region of Southeast Asia, right? So if we fail, if we are unable to operate efficiently, every cost will also harm our partners, in a sense, in every way possible. Eventually, our partner will also bear the cost if we cannot operate as efficient as possible. So yeah, I think that is something that every startup has in mind currently, and really are driving into the profitability. Second point is, obviously, other than being profitable in the future, hopefully soon. Secondly is also we need to stay relevant, because otherwise demand will go and there's nothing left for us. So we need to stay relevant. And how do we stay relevant? One of the idea or one of the initiatives that we've been doing is to keep innovating, not only in building some product features that are related to our current services or products, but also maybe expanding the business line to make us more resilient, especially when another pandemic, hopefully not, but yeah, in case those things happen, we need to be prepared.
So all of this market valuation and networking is actually part of building the path to profitability itself, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm starting to get it. So is the super app trend, is that recent trend is also part of the startup struggle to stay relevant and like gain more market share and profit?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about market share and profit, but simply said, it's to retain demand. So, for example, imagine you're a startup, maybe you're offering travel products, and then COVID hit. People don't travel anymore. how do you generate revenue when your company still have to operate during this pandemic? You cannot just lay off people, right? I mean, of course, to some extent, maybe you need to do that, but in a sense, if you want to continue doing your business, there are other things that you need to boost. For example, you want to boost the number of traffic going to your apps, your platforms, and being relevant, being super app, providing daily needs in their apps is one of the ways to attract people to stay with us. Although again, we agree that the cost of switching between one app and another is very low.
But I would like to challenge an earlier notion that you made about how this startup still have a clear path on profitability, because a lot of international observer and many of the mainstream news media about economics, one of those are the prominent The Economist, they are criticizing that because the cost of switching between apps are so low, customers are, in their own terms, promiscuous in a way that it is very easy for them to switch app, enjoy discounts, enjoy an amazing feature of one app or one startup, and the next day or even the next hour, the consumers can easily ditch that startups and use the other super apps from another startups. So how do you see this problem as a part of the challenges that you face in order to achieve profitability?
Yeah, very good question. In a sense, when you want to stay in the market, when you want to achieve profitability, you need to maintain the demand, or not demand. I'm saying this as if it was a thing, but actually we are working with customers. We want customers to stay with us, right? And to build this loyalty, it's very difficult, actually. I admit that, especially in Indonesia, where the market is very, very elastic. People are very price sensitive. And as you said earlier, like when people found a discount, they will simply go to whichever platform that gives them that discount. But so that is also something that also keep us challenged and motivated to always try to provide other ways to make customers choose us over the others. Like, for example, improving the services. I talked earlier about the network effect and how, like, for example, if you order something from Grab, you actually expect to get a driver as soon as possible if you are going somewhere, right? So, yeah, that kind of things are something that we are trying to improve. So we need to make sure that our customers are always satisfied with the products. And we need to continuously innovate, in a sense. So maybe not only maintaining the current services or product that we have, but we also need to continuously innovate. Like, what do customers need? What can they get from us? How can they benefit more by using our apps, for example? And yeah, I believe in each of the startups, this has been something that very, very challenging for them. So that's why if you go to one of the maybe e-commerce, maybe ride-hailing platforms or any other startup platforms that you see on the internet, they keep launching this new feature, or maybe some of them are even building a new business line. And building a new business line is basically we want to build a more another part of the ecosystem. So by like completing the whole ecosystem, we actually hope that customers will choose us over the competitors, for example.
All right, so the real questions here is, I want to know what is your viewpoints on how this problem can create a future problems about creating a solid customer base, as you know that the traditional industry always has a solid customer base, but the behavior and the fluctuations in the market ecosystem of startup, I think it clearly gives us a problem in the future about how startups can have a solid customer base and how they can survive without a solid customer base. So what is your view on this?
To some extent, since customers are very price sensitive, we cannot purely eliminate like doing promos, for example. I think everyone is aware of that we also need to like retain those customers and make them use our our services. But another way is building those non-monetary attraction for the customers, be it from the product or be it from the services. So we need to make sure that, like for example, the service itself is top notch. Like people will prefer us over the others. How do we do that? I think every company is currently thinking about the ways they can actually bring in customers, and even those who are already in a public, already become a public company, they're still trying to figure out those things because customers' behavior changes over time, right? And trend also changes over time, and this is not something that is very like happen like quickly. We need to like invest. We need to stay for a longer period of time and like make sure those customers don't actually churn. And yeah, you're right. Without customer, we're nothing, right? Without customer, if startup don't have customers, then there's not even a profitability. It's just a dream because now you cannot even do your business if there's no customers for your company, right?
Okay, but yeah, I think in a way, like this fact that most startups don't have a solid customer base yet, and we are kind of promiscuous, as in we deliberately switch between apps to enjoy the various promos. I think it's actually really good for the customers itself because it enhances our utility. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a problem for the startups themselves in the long run because, yeah, in rough terms, we keep draining your money for the promotions, and yeah, I think it's like that.
Yeah, that's why we have to operate more efficiently, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So, I would like to elaborate on several challenges that startups face in Southeast Asia. So, as the startups grew bigger, they have also faced enormous challenges. Increase in the amount of startups also means tight competition as they battle neck and neck over market share. Unexpected challenges can sometimes come also from the external environment, such as the fundamental challenges to operate in Southeast Asia. Transport and logistical infrastructures, such as roads, ports, and other transport channels, are of course underdeveloped, and communications and internet connectivity remain unequal all across the board, all across the regions. So, what do you think of the impact of these challenges, and what does it take for startups to face them?
Yeah, so many challenges. We need to break them down one by one, I think. Yeah. So let's take it one by one then. Regarding the competition and how can we face them and stay in the market. So being efficient, being cost efficient and effective, and being reliable for the customer is one thing, right? It is the way how we are aiming to reach profitability in the future. That's one thing. The other thing that we also need to prepare is those non-monetary things. Like, yeah, I think this makes sense when you talk about regulations. They only came up when the startup is already there. And then they see that there's something wrong with the market. We need to regulate the market. That is something that we should expect. as a company. So we should also operate ethically, and we should also make sure that we are not trying to profiting from our partners. See, so we're helping them grow, and we want to grow as well. We want to grow the revenue, the profit, and so on. But we also want to help the customers, the merchants, the partners that we have. So, expecting government to regulate our business is something that we are actually foreseeing in the future, especially after we've seen so many cases in the past. And this has been discussed in the company itself, that we need to prepare for this. Other than making sure that this far we have operates ethically, we also need to make sure, like, in case those things happen, in case the government are forcing us to maybe raise the price to make sure that our partners are able to live during this COVID situation, because they have been losing a lot of revenue, right? No doubt. Yeah, so it has been and it should always be part of the strategy to prepare for those things from the government. And the third thing is that we also need to care about data governance, right? There has been some cases in Indonesia where the data were leaked and so on, and I believe that really disappointed the customers.
Even the president has his data leak.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about that.
Yeah, that's very disappointing, and that should not happen. I mean, startups collected really like a bunch, not a bunch, like a million, trillions, tons of data every day, every minute, as we talk. So data governance is very important. Not only we're making sure that the data do not go outside, but also within the company itself, we need to make sure that we are using it ethically. For example, even though I work in Grab, like I cannot see my own transaction, for example, because I have no business needs related to why should I look at my own transaction, right? So the personally identified information is something that we need to protect, and if not really required, we are not supposed to use that. So that's one of the example of how we do this data governance. And also, like, within the company itself, we need to make sure that we only give access to data to those who really need it and those relevant stakeholders. And yeah, I think the fourth thing is still related to network effect. I mean, in Jakarta, the network is good. But say you want to develop the startup further, you want to expand to the whole Indonesia. Indonesia is not just Jakarta, right? You have the whole Java Island, for example, and this far we have not even covered. I think most startups have not even covered, like, probably the whole area of Java itself. We are trying to be hyper local. We are trying to expand the market as we can, but also this is dependent on how the government and the infrastructure are currently available. The more we have tech savvy people, of course, it will benefit us, as it will grow the market. But also, we need to also collaborate with the government in any way we can, if we can help the government to build the infrastructure, because I think startup is already a part of the current way of people life, and if we don't have it, just imagine what will happen. I think it's already a big part of people's life, and given this, I believe that government is also considering to work with us, and hopefully in the future they will, build the infrastructure and help us to expand the services to those people who are actually in need of this all tech benefit. But you see, one of interesting collaboration between startups and government is, for example, the one we did recently during this COVID pandemic. Actually, I'm not promoting Grab, but yeah, we help the government to vaccinate our drivers. So just imagine the rate of vaccination thus far. It's I might say that in Jakarta it's pretty fast, but maybe in other areas, or even in areas in Java Island, which is people said it's a center of it's still the center of economy, but some people are still unvaccinated. But with Grab, we help the government to reach out to those drivers who are located across Indonesia. So I guess the problem of infrastructure and communications are there, but other than requiring or hoping that government will actually build any infrastructure that can benefit us, we should also show the government that, hey, we can also collaborate and help you to solve this existing problems in everyday life, especially if related to this pandemic situation.
Well, honestly, this is a lot to take in as the challenges is, well, enormous, as we have said before. But I noticed that our discussions has delved into the role of government in this startups market ecosystem. But I also noticed that in the last few months, we have seen a global trend in government policy all across the world to crack down on digital tech giants. Last week, for example, the People's Republic of China took over 50 regulatory actions ranging from antitrust to data regulations, impacting startups from Douyin or TikTok and Tencent or Tencent. And across the ocean, we have also seen that the US Department of Justice brought charges against the big tech companies such as Google or Amazon. While we hope that the government might cooperate and collaborate with startups, but what we have seen here is a global trend in which the big economies of the world, China and America, of course the United States, has enthusiastically cracked down on the role of startups in the current economy. How do you view this trend?
Yeah. Of course, regulations, we should expect government to regulate us, right? But in a good way. Those things that maybe happen in, as you mentioned, like China and other countries where it feels like governments are trying to make charges happen for a reason, right? Maybe there has been not only that the startup is not so yeah. I think if you think about the relationship between startup and government, we are just a company, right? When you what can government possibly gain from a company, right? Firstly, there's something very obvious here. Maybe it's from revenue from tax. But since startup is not yet profitable, how can we even provide a tax revenue tax in a sense? And then secondly is the other benefits that we might offer. Like, for example, we are providing employment for people. We are also connecting people, and well, fairly said, we are also collecting data from people, although we should not abuse it, right? And it is very sometimes it's very disappointing to see when you heard a rumor, like, for example, in China, government are trying to force the company to give the data to the government so that government can maybe control people or something. I don't know what's the use cases, but that's quite disappointing, right? But if you can be on a good term with the government, I believe those regulations that seems to break the neck of the startup wouldn't happen. So this also relates to how we treat our partners fairly and our customers fairly. If we can treat our customers fairly and partners fairly in this case, I believe those things wouldn't happen in a normal world, especially in Indonesia, because we need customers, but in some way customers also need us because they still use our services thus far, right? Yeah. So that's on the government regulation. I hope that answered your question.
So there's some very intricate dynamics between startups and governments all across the world. And not just governments actually, but as you said earlier, with the customers and with the partners and how the startup tries to balance all of them, right? Yeah, I think our discussion about startups today has undoubtedly revealed many new insights, and apparently there is more to this modern business model than what meets the eye. And as we have talked about earlier, recent developments have also shown that startups can go beyond what they're originally intended for and keep changing to stay relevant. However, I think the final and penultimate question here still remains. With everything taken into consideration, do you think startups will pave a new way for the economy as a whole, especially in Southeast Asia? Or will startups stay the same as we know them today, with high competition, big valuations, and contrastingly little profitability as of now?
Yeah, good question. Can we pave a new way for the economy? I think we already did in some ways, and we need to continue to do so, right? To stay relevant in the market. Otherwise, customers won't stay with us. So, taking all of this into consideration, if you compare our life maybe a decade ago with now, we have already seen the impact that many startups brought to our life, right? How we are more digitized, how we can easily access anything and get anything with shorter amount of time, and maybe we take it as granted for now. But if you really compare between today and 10 years ago, there's already an impact from startups. And although we're not profitable yet, we are doing our best to not only become profitable, but also change people's life. So in the future, especially seeing how the world are more connected today with the internet, and especially maybe you feel it as well when the pandemic hit, we need to stay at home. How do we stay in touch with the others? How do we get things, obtain things like food and groceries and such, if we don't have this current services that provided by those startups which are still not profitable as per today. But yeah, competition will remain here, especially again because people believe that the market is big. So even those incumbent or those big companies who are previously working in other sectors, they might expand and enter the startup, as what we call industry. And this will still be high competition. But again, access to market, eventually, right? If you come to Jakarta, if every other competitors enter Jakarta and want to win the market will become saturated. And we need to work also with the government to ensure that we can reach as many people as possible, not just people in Jakarta, because Indonesia is not just Jakarta. So we need to expand the access. And to do that, we need more infrastructure. We need better internet access. We need people to be more tech savvy, more able to use the gadgets and so on to access the current platforms. And yeah, so that's how we imagine the world to be in the future. And I believe that currently, although startups are still trying to retain the network effect, we are also consciously thinking about improving the profitability. So even with competition, we are more conscious on every decision that we make. Like also given COVID, for example, we have more limited cash. We have more limited fund and capital that we can use, and we don't know how long COVID will last. So that's another challenges. That's another challenges, not only just about how can we retain demand, but how can we operate with more efficiently so that we can stay in the future and build the economy to be a better economy in the future with the customers and with everyone in Indonesia or Southeast Asia in this sense.
Well, we certainly hope that startups, of course, in retrospect, after our engaging and cordial discussion today, we have seen that startups itself has grown so much since its first inception. And of course, it still has a long way to go beyond the GoTo merger, beyond the government regulation, and beyond the enormous challenges they have. So, Ms. Herline, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For more in-depth insights of current economic issues, make sure to tune in and subscribe to the Canopy on Air podcast, which includes Speakonomics on Anchor,
YouTube,
Spotify,
Apple Podcasts,
and other podcast platforms.
I'm Tantra Tanjaya.
And I'm Devan Hadrian.
This is Speakonomics, brought to you by Canopy FEBUI.